Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about physical media, something that's very important to me personally, whether it be to do with video games or music, movies, or with books, literally just any form of media. I like to collect it physically. But obviously we're specifically talking about video games in this video. I'm sure you've probably seen a lot of these types of videos around already. This is not the first video to be uploaded on this topic. There's already loads of them. And generally they're titled something like physical media is dying, and which is very depressing, but not untrue, unfortunately. However, I'm not going to title it that because I'm worried that if we use those words too much, we're literally going to manifest it into a reality. So, no thank you. Physical media isn't in the best place at the moment. Companies are trying to push us towards, in gaming specifically, in gaming, companies are trying to push us towards digital. They're trying to get us to go all digital, especially Microsoft. I mean, Microsoft with Xbox, you know, they kind of gave up on physical media this generation, but with the last generation, they already really wanted to push everything towards digital. It's fair to say that Xbox is probably the gaming platform that, you know, they've basically just given up on physical media at this point, it's fair to say. So that leaves Sony and Nintendo, but we know that Nintendo with the Switch 2, there's this keycard situation, which we're going to discuss in this video as well, because I didn't really bring up the keycard situation much, well, at all actually, in my video that I made about why I'm not getting the Switch 2 at launch, and I still don't have one. I don't plan to get one anytime soon. One of the big reasons I don't want to get one yet is because of the keycards. I'm not a fan of the keycards, obviously, unsurprisingly. So for the Switch 2, it looks like all of the first-party games are going to be on the card, which is good. But as for the third-party games, most of them are not going to be on the card. So far, we only have Cyberpunk 2077. Well, out of the launch lineup, at least, we had Cyberpunk 2077 and Rune Factory Guardians of Azuma were the only two third-party games that were complete on the cartridge. The other ones were key cards. Now, the reason that so many of these third-party games are key cards as opposed to the game being fully on the cartridge is because Nintendo is only offering either a 64GB cartridge or a cartridge that has like 1 megabyte of storage on it or something, just enough to put a code on the thing, which then when you put it in your Switch 2, it activates the download. So if a company makes a game that's like 12 gigabytes or something, they're not going to buy a 64GB cartridge to put the full game on, are they? Because that's going to cost a lot of money. These cartridges are not cheap to manufacture. I think in the reports they were about $16 or something per cartridge, which is a lot of money. Now, cartridges have always been expensive anyway to manufacture, and one of the reasons why PlayStation, when it hit the market, was able to sell games and the console itself for cheaper was because they were manufacturing and putting the games on discs rather than cartridges. Because discs, whether it be CDs, DVDs, Blu-rays, or the HD Blu-rays, which is what PS5 games are now on, they are way cheaper to manufacture than cartridges are. I'm pretty sure that HD Blu-rays are like $2, maybe like $3 per Blu-ray disc to manufacture or something like that, but they're definitely a lot cheaper than these cartridges are for the Switch 2. So, because they're very expensive, Nintendo obviously realized that for these developers, there isn't going to be much incentive to buy these expensive cartridges to put their games on if they're going to have to either cut into their profits or price the game up. And they know that obviously us consumers aren't keen on paying more for video games, although I think a lot of us would be willing to pay more money to have the game actually fully on the cartridge rather than pay less and the game isn't fully on the cartridge, because I think a lot of us just refuse to buy these things like game key cards and stuff. So that's why I guess Nintendo, I don't really know why Nintendo aren't offering smaller sizes than the 64GB cartridges though. I wouldn't have thought that they would be stuck between those two options in terms of manufacturing cartridge sizes. So I don't really know why those are the only two options that they're manufacturing. It's quite strange, but that's the current situation. So now the other thing is, game key cards aren't a new concept, because I know that there's people that are like, why is it that people are making such a big deal about the Switch 2 game key cards when this is a concept that PlayStation does or that Xbox has been doing for a while as well. And you're right. But the difference, I think, that we need to remember is that it's a very small minority of PS5 and PS4 games, for example, that are these like situations where the game isn't fully on the disc and there's only part of the game on it and then you have to download the rest of it. Or, for example, with something like the Spyro Reignited trilogy, only one of the games is on the disc and then the other two you have to download. Now, I didn't even realise that when I bought the game, but it says it on the front. But anyway, it is a minority of games. It's definitely not the same as the Switch 2 situation where pretty much all of the third-party games are game key cards. As for Xbox, I'm not an expert on Xbox. I don't really know fully what the situation is there. I have never had an Xbox. So I don't really look into the situation there too much. But I'm aware from like videos and stuff I've seen that basically Xbox kind of just, they're worse. They're like the worst situation, but probably the reason why people haven't really been kicking up as much of a fuss about Xbox, I guess, is because it seems to me at least that people that are, you know, Xbox fans and stuff, and people that specifically have an Xbox and, you know, play on Xbox and stuff, they don't seem to really be people that buy physical games all that much, if even really digital games. It seems that a lot of them use Game Pass. So that's probably why people haven't really kicked up a huge fuss about Xbox, I guess. But as far as Nintendo goes, a lot of Nintendo users are people that like to collect physical games. And I think there's a lot of people that play PlayStation also that are physical gamers like myself. I like physical games, you know. I don't want to move to an all digital future, thank you. That's not, I'm actually actively trying to get out of having subscription services and having like physical copies of pretty much all of my favorite media so that I can be more intentional with what I consume. Because the thing with subscription services is they completely remove intentionality. You're flooded with all of these different options of games to play, movies and series to watch, music to listen to, and it's overwhelming, and you end up where you're just looking through it for ages, thinking, what should I play, watch, listen to, whatever, and then you don't play, listen to, or watch any of it. Physical media itself, across the board, isn't necessarily dying, because it's interesting because it depends on what industry we're talking about. The gaming industry is an industry where physical games are very much kind of dying out, although we are seeing a rise of people from my generation. I'm a zillennial, so I'm literally on the cusp of Gen Z. There's more people from my generation now that are like, whether it be because of nostalgia or because we've kind of realized or kind of started caring about ownership of your media. People from my generation seem to now be kind of getting into physical game collecting and stuff like that more so than before. But in general, it's on the decline still. But we are seeing like a little bit of a sort of, it might lead into like a resurgence of some sort of trend or something, I don't know, but at the moment it's still on the decline. Whereas music, for example, physical like CDs, vinyls were very much on the decline. Vinyls were literally dead at one point. They were literally dead. You couldn't see vinyls anywhere. I remember in like the late 2000s and the early 2010s, vinyls practically didn't exist anymore. You couldn't. I never walked into a store. I never saw a vinyl in a store anywhere. Even when I was a kid, actually, now that I think about it. So I guess all throughout the 2000s, they were just dead. But then vinyls had a massive resurgence, and I don't really know what caused it because I haven't looked into it, but it's interesting. And CDs never actually died, but they were on the decline. But now they're kind of picking up a little bit again. All hope is not lost, though, with games, because there are a lot of people on YouTube and on the internet in general that are quite outspoken and vocal about the fact that they care about physical media and that they care about physical games. And there's a lot of people that are trying to preserve physical games as much as possible. So because there's people that care, I don't think that they are literally going to die out yet, but it all depends on what happens over the next console generation, probably, if I'm being honest with you. Obviously, the majority of PS5 games are on disc. I'm hoping that when the PlayStation 6 eventually comes out, that will also, there'll be physical games that are fully on the disc for that as well. I'm hoping, but I don't know. The other thing, Sony is very weird. I never really know. I don't consider myself a PlayStation fan. I don't really like to label myself as a fan of a specific gaming platform, really. Because these are massive corporations, and I'm just someone who uses their platforms to play games on. I don't see myself as a fan. I'm not someone who has shares in the business or anything. So whether they do well or not, to me, it doesn't really matter. But I am very nostalgic for PlayStation. I do have a slight bias towards PlayStation, if I'm being honest with you, just because the first game console I ever played on was the original PlayStation. The PS2 was a massive thing for me. I loved the PS2. We had a PS3, a PS4, and I've now got a PS5. So every PlayStation, I've had every PlayStation apart from the handhelds, but I have them now as well. So yes, I do admittedly have a slight bias towards PlayStation. Just because I like PlayStation a lot doesn't mean that I'm going to blindly buy the next PlayStation that comes out, because if it doesn't have a disc drive and if it doesn't support physical media, or they're doing kind of something similar to what's going on with the Switch 2, I won't buy it at launch. Not that I've ever bought a console at launch anyway. And I'll be basically observing the situation. But I will be very mad and disappointed if Sony does literally just say, nah, this is an all digital console. There's no option for physical media for the PS6. I don't think we're at the stage yet where Sony would do that. Just because at the forefront, Sony is a hardware company, and they alongside Philips literally invented the media disc, and they have kind of a share in the business or whatever. So there is incentive for Sony to kind of see the Blu-ray do well, if that makes sense. But I don't know. I don't really know. It's complicated with Sony, to be honest with you. Microsoft, we all kind of know what direction they're going in at this point. Sony is kind of it seems like they're trying to follow the traditional console experience. But they have also been pushing digital quite a bit, so it's very confusing. I don't really know what direction they're going to go in. But either way, if they do decide to go all digital, then my question at that point is, what is the point in me buying a PlayStation over a PC? Because yes, they're more convenient and they're easier to set up. I'm not going to deny that. That is one of the main reasons I really like consoles, that and physical media. Those are the two things. But if you get rid of physical media, we're down to one reason. And then I kind of look at it and think, okay, so there's one reason for me to have a PlayStation over a PC. But then when you think about what PCs can offer, gaming PCs, they basically kind of outweigh the console at that point. As nostalgic I am for consoles, and as much as I love them, you need to give me a reason to buy it, because I'm looking at it from a rational perspective. I may be quite a nostalgic person, but for me, I need a financial incentive, or there needs to be some sort of like benefit to having a console over a PC for me to be willing to buy one. And if there isn't, I'll probably just switch over to PC. But as far as the current like console generation is going, with like the consoles we have on the market now and the two that I have, you know, I have a Switch, you know, the Switch 1, and I have a PS5. The PS5, let's say I do end up getting a Switch 2 in the future, because I might do, but it all depends on the keycard situation and what first-party games are released. But at this point in time, it's looking like if I did get a Switch 2, it would literally just be to play Nintendo first-party games on, and the PS5 would be where I buy and play all of my third-party games. And for the record, the vast majority of the games that I'm interested in are always third-party games. Like, even with like PlayStation, there are some first-party PlayStation games that, you know, grab my interest, but the vast majority of games that I always buy and play are always third-party games. I could actually honestly live without Nintendo exclusives and Sony exclusives. I don't necessarily want to, but so anyway, that's how I'm looking at it going forward. PS5 is where I'm going to be playing all of my third-party games. Maybe I'll get a Switch 2 at some point down the line. Depends, you know, we'll see. So the other thing is there's been a report that apparently third-party Switch 2 games haven't been selling as well on Switch 2, you know, at launch as they'd been expecting. They had certain sales expectations and they didn't even meet their lowest sales expectations. And there's a lot of factors, obviously, that will have affected how well these third-party games sold, such as a lot of them were games that were already released on other consoles, and also the Switch 2 is fairly expensive, and a lot of people will have bought that with Mario Kart, and Mario Kart was expensive unless you got the bundle. So a lot of people won't have, you know, really had money left over necessarily to buy another game, or they already had a lot of these games. So there is that aspect. But the thing is that they said that the sales didn't even reach their lowest expectations. And I'm fairly sure that these market specialists at these companies would have realised that this is an old game. It's been out for I don't know how many years already. The Switch 2 costs a lot of money. These companies, they're familiar with console launches, okay? Like Sega is familiar with console launches. They know that how, you know, kind of how it goes, you know? So they would have factored that in, I'm pretty sure. So the main component then that they wouldn't really have been able to determine how is going to affect sales would be the key cards, because that's kind of a new, although it's not literally a new thing in the industry, it's definitely new for it to be this widespread, right, for a console. So they probably didn't know how the game not actually being on the game card was going to affect the physical sales of the third-party games, which I think is what's led to the sales being lower than their lowest expectations, because I think they will have factored in the other stuff. I do believe that a lot of people are refusing to buy the game key cards because I'm kind of in this little kind of community on the internet with gaming, and I like to watch other YouTubers that talk about these things as well, and I read the comments on their videos, and there's a lot of people, and I know that you could say it's an echo chamber, and that people on the internet just say things, but it doesn't really translate into what's going on in real life. That can be the case, but I mean, we have data that lines up now with what people have been saying. Whether this is kind of just like a fluke and that doesn't reflect what's to come for the Switch 2 generation, I don't know. It might not actually reflect what's going to happen, but it could do. I just wanted to talk about this because it's been on my mind a lot. I had meant to make a video about this earlier, but I didn't. So I've made it now. Anyway, I'd like to introduce my cat Mitzi. People that have come from my other channel will recognise her. This won't be your first time seeing her, but I haven't actually introduced Mitzi on my gaming channel yet, so this is my baby. Anyway, thanks for watching. Let me know what you think of all of this physical media situation in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye bye.